So Hasan Piker, who's been in the news recently, quite a lot. He's never far away. He went on the New York Times podcast with Ross Do That. I actually really like this podcast. I think it's the only good thing that the New York Times are actually doing these days. Well, it's the best thing that the New York Times are doing. And he talked a little bit about his worldview and ideology, and I wanted to get your thoughts on this.
Right. So you've got people on the right who would call themselves post-liberal. You've got religious post-liberals. You've got the Curtis Yarvin, we're going to have a Silicon Valley king post-liberal, right? So you're a left post-liberal. I think that's fair. But
yes, I wouldn't say I'm a liberal, yeah.
Right, you're post, right? So you want something after. Liberalism was good for a while, but it's generated too many inequalities. It's too harsh on the world. But what is the alternative? Is it Marxist? Is it essentially deeper and more profound government management of the economy? What are we talking about?
I think I don't have the perfect solution for this, and this is something that I readily admit, but I think moving in the direction of socialism would be a wonderful start. And the reason why I say that is because, as you mentioned, like a lot of the post-liberal conversations almost always revolve around unifying strength in the hands of one singular figure or one person, going back to a neo-feudalist or like a
aristocratic
crypto monarch structure that Curtis Yarvin advocates for. What I'm advocating for is more democracy, principled democracy, not even in the anarchist sense where everything has to be handled with or all unjustifiable hierarchies must be abolished through direct participation, but at least like having a more democratic process and getting people more involved, starting at the point of commodity production and then moving all the way to political participation.
I want to talk in a minute about sort of how you developed this worldview and your background, but I want to pause on that idea of sort of democratic change, right? Is all effective change democratic? Or the thing that the original post-liberal Marxists tended to believe, right, was that, there's certain things you can accomplish through a democratic system, but there's also revolutionary moments.
You got to kill people.
Right? To be clear, this isn't just a Marxist idea.
Yeah.
That's what they
thought. This is sort of what he's leaning into here. So Hasan's obviously talking about his socialist worldview. He thinks it's better if we sort of lean, more democracy, but some socialism, like leaning towards socialism, but more democracy. And then he's asking about because obviously Hasan has made comments in the past like, we want their capitalist blood in the streets and all these sorts of things. So he's like a Twitch revolutionary, you might say. Do you want to keep going with the clip?
Go. Yeah, keep going.
Okay.
Obviously, this is the United States of America. We're founded on a revolution, right? But like, what is your view of revolution as a potential transformative force in the world?
All politics, in my worldview, revolves around the distribution of resources and the distribution of power. And a big part of that component is, of course, violence as well. Revolutionary violence, for example. And it just simply means like who gets to do the violence and who gets to be on the receiving end of that violence that we have normalized. Because the systems that we exist under are inherently violent. All political systems are.
So stop it.
It's just more so.
He's right. It's the first time you'll probably ever hear me say this, right? Hasan Piker just described for you force doctrine.
I thought you might say that. Yeah.
He just described for you in not the entirety of the view, but enough of the view. What he's describing is force doctrine. And what he's saying is that if it is necessary to accommodate or accomplish his worldview via enabling the correct people to use force on the incorrect people or the people who have wrong think, he will do so. The reason that Christians need to remember force doctrine and they need to memorize it, right? Word for word, they need to memorize it, is because we are capable of the same thing. We are capable of saying the exact same thing back and rarely do because we're fools, which is if it's the case that all we're talking about is power through the monopolization of force, then I want power so I can monopolize the force for my worldview too.
Instead of these fucking commies.
Instead of these fucking communists, I want power so that I can monopolize force for my worldview, and I have just as much right to do it as you fucking communists do. And you know what they'll say? You're right. You do. And that's it. That's the end of the debate.
Yeah.
But anyway, go ahead. Keep going.
About redirecting that. And I know violence is such a scary concept in this when we're discussing in this way, but we're talking about it in an academic context. But basically, the idea is that instead of having a system that currently benefits the very few, I want
like him
a system that benefits as many people as possible. That has more, like I said, egalitarian outcomes.
Right. There we go. So he wants to utilize force for the purpose of removing people who disagree with him so that he can maximize egalitarian outcomes, right? He thinks that political violence is just as acceptable as the methods of democracy because power to him just means people who have access to force. So if you're powerful, you have access now to a wide array of people who can enforce your will. They have access to force. Communists are saying, we will take over using force. We want to be in power positions so we can take over the use of force. Christians cannot be ignorant to this. They cannot be ignorant and so ridiculously stupid that we forget that one of the key parts of why we want Christians in power is so that we can have the monopoly on force, even if we don't ever use it.
It's exactly
There's
like
a
that
good
meme
reason to have a monopoly on force, even if you never want to use it.
Yeah.
That might be, in fact, the best reason for you to monopolize the power of force is so that you never have to use it. They will fucking use it.
Well, do you know that? Have you ever heard Jordan Peterson on Jocko Willink's podcast? One of my favorite appearances that Jordan Peterson's ever done, where he says a good man is not a weak man or a passive man. A good man is a very, very dangerous man. A good man is a man who is capable of extreme violence, but he voluntarily keeps it under control. So
yeah, well,
it's
there's an aspect to that, but
you don't want to be a doormat. You want to be
there's
capable
more,
of
the
violence, but you don't use
what
it
he's
in a
talking
bad
about
way.
there is he's expressing like on the micro, what makes a man individually good or decent or a person who's really worthwhile in society. And he said, well, an element of that man being able to be dangerous is also a respectable component. So he was trying there to say it is actually respectable to be somebody capable of violence, even if you're a person who doesn't use it. This is different, though. This is talking about the struggle for power itself. And what Hasan is giving is the Marxist lens that we need to have power because we need to be able to monopolize force so that we can stop our political enemies from going against our will and utilizing force. That's what we want to do.
Yeah, I think you can also kind of apply that to the micro level as well, though, because just say you have two men who are competing for a position of power, like in their community, for example. One of them is a very dangerous man, but who has that under voluntary control and will look out for his community, and the other one is malicious and who will sort of take all the resources for himself and who will be cruel. Like, you want that guy being the leader of the community. You want that guy being the leader of the household. You want that guy being the leader of himself as well.
The problem with how you're equating these things is the reason they don't really equate well individualistically is on the micro as they do on the macro is because you can be a guy in a wheelchair capable of no violence, have the keys to power, though, and still use power correctly, right? But that doesn't mean that individually you're going to be able to necessarily inspire leadership without the capability of being able to utilize personal power. Depends on what it is you're going for, what people are willing to follow. So the micro level doesn't necessarily follow that because you're a powerful man, you're going to utilize power well or not well. What does follow, though, is that if it's the case that you don't want to be ruled by lunatics, then you need to remember that you seizing power is a duty that you have because otherwise the lunatics will, and they will use force against you in order to back their world belief. And if you're the only one stupid enough who's not be willing to use the keys of power to use force against theirs, you lose.
Yeah, for sure.
It's that simple.
And the current system, as you said, uses violence. And yeah, all political systems are about the monopoly of force in the end, right? But you use the phrase redirect violence. What does it mean to say we need to redirect violence?
I mean, first of all, I abhor violence. Let's just start there, right? Mm-hmm. But violence in this abstract concept would be equivalent to the structural violence of poverty, for example. So when I'm talking about violence, I want to make it very clear. I'm not talking like go out, take up arms, and like start shooting people, right? I'm talking about the structural violence of poverty. Redirecting that in the same way would be the structural violence of equity, because
structural eradication.
No, that's about
it. Yeah, but I mean,
this is the last part of the deconstruction that's so important of this worldview, right? He ties it together here pretty well. To Hasan Piker, in his worldview, violence is words themselves.
Yeah,
words themselves are violence, not just words themselves, but just structures of how people do business, commerce, or live is to him in and of itself a form of violence. And so from their perspective, you have to understand they think of themselves as liberators, right? If you're in a very poor part of a city, they're going in there to use violence in order to liberate you from the violence of non-equitable behavior, to liberate you from the violence of mean, harsh words, to liberate you from the violence of not having enough money. To them, right, they're using force defensively. They consider that defensive force. If you are going out there, for instance, talking about, I don't know, authoritarianism, you want authoritarianism in the United States, let's say, or you're a protectionist, you're talking about protectionist policies. They see that as a way for you to keep the underclass down from their view. And that is a form of violence. So if you're committing violence, is it perfectly acceptable for them to defend the people from you? The answer is yes. And that is how they think.
Yeah,
because they think that way, you have no choice. The reins of power must be in the hands of Christians. It can't be in the hands of secularists, atheists, communists, anybody else. It has to be in the hands of Christians, because we're the only ones who seem to be able to distribute power correctly.
Yeah, dude. I mean, it's so telling when they say things like that, because actually inequitable outcomes. So if you have more than other people, that's violence. Inequity is violence.
So when he says, let the streets run red with the blood of capitalists, that's not.
It's consistent with his worldview.
So that might be, but hang on, that might be a direct call to violence. But remember, from their view, all right, he thinks that capitalists are already in the commission of economic violence against the people group, which they rule. So he's talking about a defensive action. These people, from their twisted and insane view, it's a defensive action to stop you from your economic violence. It's something as small as you're a landlord. You're a landlord and you have multiple tenants. Those tenants all pay you rent. That's exploitation. You're engaging in economic violence. They need to defend those people from you. So what happens to you? Well, you're off to jail, or you get shot, or whatever the fuck it is that they do in order to stop the permeation of this violence. And the second you start moving towards violence is not an action of physicality. It's not an action of physical force itself, but it's something entirely different than that, which can just be in the simple forms and methods in which people live. Then you can categorize anything as self-defense. And that's the key point to why communists are lunatics, progressives are lunatics, and they have to be stopped. They literally have to be stopped by us seizing and keeping power forever. We have to keep it forever, because you can't give them any. They're too deranged and crazy to give them any form of power at all.
Yep, exactly right. I mean, I knew that one was an interesting clip, and there'd be a lot to chew on there. And it says so much in those few minutes, even though it's coming from doofus dense Hasan.